Yeah, so I've posted the new link already. You can just check it out. Yeah, so you can check out the new link here. So is the audio okay? Just let me know if the audio is fine. Yeah, it's called class 2. Is the audio fine? Okay, great. So is there any lag or delay now? Because I've just created new stream. Uh, okay, there's no lag or anything, right? I mean, there's not much lag or delay, right? Okay, great. Yeah, so we'll just continue. Let's just see how many are watching. There are only two. Yeah. Okay, great. Sure. Okay. So I'll just post the new link again. Okay, great. So let's just continue. Yeah. So yeah, as we were discussing, white is just creating additional weaknesses on the king side for black to deal with, and now black has prevented white from coming to h5 with this move pawn to g6. So now that is not possible, as we already got suggestions in the chat. The next idea for white is to come to h3. So the idea is very simple behind this. He just wants to go to the g5 square and attack the h7 pawn. And if white defends it, he can still come to f6. For example, by h7, knight h7, knight f6, and that is also possible. And even moves like he can maybe even go to f7 from here. So all these are real possibilities for white. So that is the reason behind knight to h3. So black decides to prevent this with h6. Now knight g5 is no longer possible, of course. Knight g5 is no longer possible because obviously the pawn on h6. Yeah, I'll give you the link. Yeah, this is the new link. Yeah, so we have suggestions of knight f4. Yeah, exactly. So this is the basic idea behind White's plan. He's just taking away squares and creating some additional squares for his knight to come to. So now that Black controls the h5 and g5 squares, he just comes via f4. And now it attacks the pawn on e6 and also the pawn on g6. So moves like bishop e8 are no longer possible because the e6 pawn is hanging. So this is the main idea behind White's plan. Just keep on creating weaknesses. Yeah. So yeah, bishop e8 obviously is not possible. So black finally has to go g5 and give away the h5 square. So white managed to indirectly achieve this square h5, because it was not directly possible since black just kept on taking away the squares. Yeah, so white just managed to achieve knight h5, and now he can enter via f6. Okay, so bishop e8, since black again doesn't have much to do because his bishop is very limited because his pawns his block his own bishop. Okay, so knight f6, bishop f7. Again, knight g4, attacking the pawn on h6, creating additional weaknesses. So as we observed, white is not doing anything special. He's just maneuvering his knight in such a way that it attacks pawns. So it's not that hard to understand. It's just maneuver your knight in such a way that you attack a pawn. Just attack pawns with your knight. That's all there is. Nothing complicated, nothing special. Okay. So black plays the move h5 obviously because that's the only way to defend the pawn on h6. There was no other way to defend the h6 pawn. He has to play h5. Now knight e3 again. Yeah, so now the knight on f6 is not doing much, right? Because the h5 pawn is already defended. So white tries a different approach. He comes via e3 here, and black plays the move g6. Sorry, bishop g6. Black could have tried h4 here, but this just loses a pawn, right? Because then knight g2, and if h3, you have knight f4, and the h3 pawn is lost. So this doesn't work. He could have also tried to move g4, maybe fixing this pawn structures, preventing white's pawns from moving. But then again, this gives away the f4 and the h4 square, so white can take advantage of that with moves like this. Yeah. And again, black is in Zugzwang, right? Black has no moves with the bishop, which defend both the e6 and the h5 pawn. And he has no pawn moves because the pawn on b4 blocks a5. The d4 square is covered by the king. So if the king moves to d7, you have king b6. And if the king moves to b7, you have king d6. Yeah. So you've created a Zugzwang position where the bishop is stuck and your king is entering the game. So that is why moves like h4 and g4 don't work. So black finally managed to get the move bishop g6. Yeah, so black's bishop is actually much more active than before. But the thing is, it doesn't really matter at this point because white has achieved all his goals, right, of creating weaknesses. And he's just going to fix these weaknesses now. By fixing these weaknesses, we just mean that he's going to fix this h5 pawn and then get his knight to f4, right? So currently the pawn on g5 prevents him from coming to f4. So he just needs to get rid of this, and that he does with this move h4. So now this pawn on h5 is permanently fixed. Now you already know what happens if the pawn advances to g4. You're just creating a zugzwang position with the knight on f4, pawn to b4, and this attacks both e6 and h5. So black can't defend both these things at once. So this just creates a zugzwang. So that is the main idea behind White's play. Just fix this pawn on h5, and the main point is you need to get your knight to f4, from where it attacks the e6 pawn and also the h5 pawn, which creates a zugzwang for black, right? Once you play the move b4, he can't advance his pawns on the queen side. Wherever he moves the king, you enter via the other side. If he goes to d7, you come to b6. If he comes to b7, you go to d6. Yeah. So this is the main idea behind White's play. So black takes the pawn, you just capture, and we just follow our idea of coming to f4. Okay, you need to maneuver a little because the bishop was controlling the squares from where you could reach f4, so you need to maneuver a little. Yeah, finally the bishop had to give away those squares because there was no way for the bishop to defend both e6 and the e2 square from where you want to go, like e2 f4, and it couldn't also defend the e6 pawn. And we already know if the king moves, you always have this king b6 idea. Yeah. So finally he gives up this e2 square and white just creates a zugzwang. So now white is attacking the h5 pawn. Black has to defend this. Also the e6 pawn is obviously attacked by the knight. So bishop g4 and yeah, what does white play now? What should white do here to get a zugzwang? So zugzwang, as you already know, is just a position where the opponent doesn't have any useful moves. Whatever he plays is bad. Yeah, we got a suggestion of b4. Yeah, that is exactly right. So the right way for black to proceed, and the only good way for black to proceed, not b3. You don't need to do b3 because b4 prevents the pawn moving to a5 also, right? So b3, yeah, b3 is also good enough, I guess. Like it still creates a zugzwang, but or b4 is just more, I just more precise. Knight g6, you could do knight g6, but a4 you're just giving up this pawn, right? There's no need to do all this. Even this should be good because then maybe you capture this pawn, but there's just no need to do all this. There's no need to go for all these things. Just b4 wins the game. Knight g6, okay, just your knight is already in the best place possible, right? You're attacking the pawn on e6 and the pawn on h5, so there's no need to move the knight further. Knight is already in the best place possible. You could play b3, I guess. This would also still be a zugzwang, right? Yeah, this would still be a zugzwang. You can't. I mean, you can't move a5 because b5 is hanging, and there's no other useful move which defends both h5 and e6. If king moves here, you can go here, and if the king moves here, you can just go here. Yeah, so b3 would also be fine, but b4 is just more precise. It's completely shutting down all this, and there's no useful moves. So yeah, that's it, and there's absolutely nothing for white to do here. We'll just see how it ended. So he has to give up one of these squares, right? He has to give up either the b6 square or the d6 square. He decides to give up the b6 square. He goes king d7, just king b6, capture. Yeah, even this pawn falls. White is how many pawns up here? White is two pawns up, and he's getting knight d4 check. The b5 pawn is going to fall. The e6 pawn is passed. The h5 pawn is weak, and he can create a passer with moves like a4. So this game, white black just decided to resign here. Yeah. So this I think was one of the simplest executions of this weak bishop versus strong knight. Right? We just saw how easy it is to create weaknesses when you have a strong knight. and just using those weaknesses, you're entering the position with your king, and you should aim for positions where there it's a zugzwang and your opponent doesn't have any useful moves left. Yes, that's the basic idea behind these positions. Okay, so now we'll just look at this, the second game. Yeah, so this again is a position with a knight versus a bishop, but it's not exactly like last time, right? Because now the bishop is not as weak as it was in the last position, so our strategy has to be slightly different here. And this was played between Karpov and Kasparov. So obviously both world championship level players. And in this position, it was not obvious how exactly White was going to make progress because unlike the last position, he doesn't really have any clear routes for the knight. The bishop is a much stronger piece. It just controls this diagonal completely. The king can't enter the game that easily, right? The crucial difference. The king is not able to enter so easily because of this bishop controlling all the squares. So White had to do something different. So Black saw all these things and decided the king cannot enter because obviously this bishop does a very good job of preventing preventing the king from entering these squares. Okay, so I think it's the audio is fine. Yeah, so Black evaluated this and decided to take gh4 because now if you take the pawn on h4, there's just no way for White to make any progress. Let's say bishop g6. You get your king to the ideal square. I mean your knight to the ideal square. Knight f4 attacks the h5 pawn. Fine, but what then? You just go bishop f7 and get your knight to c5 also, attacking the a6 pawn. Your knight is a great piece on c5, right? It attacks the a6 pawn. So, but after bishop c8, what are you going to do? Is there any way for White to make progress? Because the king cannot enter like this. The king wants to enter via f4, f5, but the bishop controls this diagonal, controls these squares. The a6 square is controlled by the bishop, and there is no zugzwang. There is never any zugzwang because he always has moves like king c6, king d6. So there's never any zugzwang. So even if White gets this ideal position, there's no way to win this game. That is what Kasparov evaluated and decided to go for this move. G takes h4. But here comes the shocker. Instead of capturing the pawn, Instead of capturing the pawn on h4, White decided to go for this very strange move, knight g2 here, which obviously is a little hard to understand, right? Because first of all, you could take a free pawn. You rejected taking this free pawn and went for this knight g2 approach. So, what is the reason behind this? Why did White go for this? Yeah, what do you think is the point behind knight g2? Yeah, so we already got the correct answer. So the point behind knight g2 is very simple. You just want to enter with your king, right? Yeah, exactly, to get the h4 square. Perfect. So in the normal approach, without so in the normal approach, if you had just taken on h4 with the pawn, there's no way for the king to enter h4, and we already saw how the king cannot enter because this bishop controls all these squares, and even on c8, the bishop does a very good job defending a6 and controlling these squares. So once you realize this, you just come to the conclusion that your king needs to enter via h4, right? And so that is the point behind the move knight g2. Now your king will easily be able to enter via h4. So obviously, h3 does knight f4, and you're just going to win this pawn. So this pawn is going to be lost, and then this pawn is also going to be lost. So knight, yeah, sure. White has a pawn down here compared to the last position, but that doesn't matter because this h5 pawn is very weak and position we looked at. So, so is the lag still ongoing? Yeah. So is it okay now? Okay, great. Yeah. So I'll just keep it a little slow so that the lag doesn't affect us. Okay, yeah. Yeah, so I'll just keep it a little slow so that the lag is not that bothersome. Yeah, so the difference between this and the last position is the king can enter via h4 here, which was not possible in the last position, right? Yeah, you want your knight on f4 and your king on h4. So this is the ideal setup, attacking the pawn on h5, and the king can easily enter the game via h5, g6, for example. Yeah. So this was the idea behind the move knight g2. So okay. white wins the pawn. So you might be wondering why white willingly gave up the why black willingly gave up the pawn on h5. So the answer behind that is very simple. He just couldn't defend the pawn on h5 for long. So even if you had played moves like bishop g6, it still doesn't really matter because knight f4 anyway, and this pawn is still lost. White is going to capture it. King and pawn in games are bad because the g6 pawn is falling, and white always has an extra move with f4 and a much more active king once he gets to uh, g6. Yeah, so that is the reason why black decided not to bother at all and just gave up the pawn. Instead activating this king, he goes king e6, knight f4. So now instead of defending this pawn passively, black at least managed to activate his king to a good square on f5, right? So at least he achieved something. White just takes the pawn on h5, of course. So now the question is, okay, black is admitting that he can't win the game, obviously, but he is asking white how he plans on winning the game, because it's not clear to black how white is entering the position. So we already know what the point behind knight g2 was, right? To make use of these squares and enter like this. So white obviously should aim for that. Yeah. So obviously knight f4 here attacks the d5 pawn. So king f5 is not possible because the d5 pawn is hanging. So uh, black goes to d6 and white just follows through with the plan. So one more important thing to notice here is, okay, so there's a question, why not take on d5? Which position are you asking about? Uh, in this position, you're wondering why not take on d5, right? Yeah, you could take on d5 in this position, but the thing is, this h5 pawn is again. The thing is, these squares will be blockaded by the bishop and the combination of the bishop and the king. So, for example, let's say moves like yeah, one second. Yeah, so let's say this something like this. If you take here, I always have this, and then black can capture the pawn on d4, and now it's not that easy to win this pawn because the bishop coming to g6 defends this pawn. The d4 pawn is going to fall, and black could maybe potentially enter like this, or even the f3 pawn, for example. He could enter and attack these pawns. So this creates some additional weaknesses. So yeah, so this is a possibility, but again, once your knight is on the edge of the board like this on a6 and c7, the king can enter the position. So it's a little risky to play like this. So instead of this, white just decides to keep his knight active and take the h5 pawn. So as we already know, the plan is very simple. You just need to enter the position, right? So white needs to do something like this and enter the position. So that's what it does. Yeah. So here, obviously, there is no way for white to defend both the f3 pawn while keeping the king active, right? So he has to give up the f3 pawn to activate the king. So he has. There's no other choice because the f3 pawn is in a light square, and he can't defend this pawn while keeping the king active. So he has to make that concession. King h5, bishop d1, king g6. So obviously he's attacking the f3 pawn, f6 pawn. So yeah, now king, this doesn't work because white just takes the pawn on f6, and now this position is actually extremely good for white because you might be wondering how white wins this game. So the answer is very simple. He just first checks on f5. He maneuvers his knight to f5, checks. So he moves the king out of the square. So once the king is out of the square, he just enters via e5. So this is the approach for white. For example, like something like let's say, yeah. And one more important thing is all the pawns on the dark squares. So the black bishop can't attack any of these pawns. So for example, let's say he plays something like, I don't know. Let's say he does this, or let's say bishop here. Yeah, and just something like this. This pawn in game is obviously losing because wherever you go, the d5 pawn is falling. Like if you go here, I just win the d5 pawn, and if you go anywhere here, again I just win the d5 pawn. So the d5 pawn is going to fall. So pawn in game is not good for black. And once the knight gets on f5, it's just, yeah, king can either go here or maybe even, yeah, king can go to squares like e5, and it's just a zoog zwang, right? Like there's not much to play for. The knight can then maneuver itself here, or maybe even get itself to c5, attack the a6 pawns. The d5 pawn is always weak, and once the king defends this pawn, the king can enter via d6. So these positions are very easy to win for white. And that is why black decides not to take the f3 pawn, and instead he goes for this move. He goes king e7, but black finally takes on d5. He decides to first defend the f6 pawn, but that allows white to capture on d5. Yeah. So here the problem is, instead of king e6, black had to go king d6. This was the only way to try and save the game, because king e6 allows this move knight c7 with check, winning the pawn on a6, right? So for example, instead of this, he could have gone king d6 here. So let's say uh, white takes on f6. First, let's look at what happens if it takes on f6. If it takes on f6, black obviously takes on f3, and this is not at all clear. This position is not at all clear, because if the knight moves away from these squares, for example, black always gets his king to d5, which is a very good square. So from d5, the bishop also controls this diagonal. The king could potentially enter via these squares. So let's just, yeah. So this is the problem with this move, this approach of taking on f6. The bishop is extremely strong now, completely controls diagonal. The king can enter the d5 square once the knight leaves the f6 square. And from d5, first of all, it attacks the knight on d4, and then it could even enter the position via moves like this. This is a problem with taking on f6. So yeah, so the other way for white to play is with moves like knight c3, right? Just not taking on f6 with the knight, but just going to the f6 square with the king, and keeping the knight on a very strong square where it prevents moves like king d5. But even this is not that clear, because sure, you achieved getting your king to a very good square. Knight controls this important square in d5, squares like e4. But the question is, how are you going to win this? How are you going to proceed later? And the answer is not that simple. So black just has to keep the bishop here on this diagonal, and it's not at all simple for white to win this game. Like even if you manage to get the ideal setup, there is no clear progress to be made. Black is just going to shuffle between these squares, control these diagonals, and if the white king is on light square, check it with the bishop. So it is not that simple at all for white to make progress in this position. So yeah, so that is the problem with yeah. So that's the problem with this. That was the problem with, sorry. Yeah, that is why the king had to come to d6 instead of e6. But playing king e6 allows knight c7 check. Knight c7 comes with a check here, and then white captures the pawn on e6, obviously. So black captures on f3. And now there is a difference between these positions. So the difference between this and the position we last looked at was that black still had the a6 pawn here. So he was just like one pawn down. But in this particular position, black is two pawns down. And the knight is easily entering this very strong square c5, with the king poised very actively to enter squares like e5, for example. But black still must have expected to win the d4 pawn in this position with moves like this. But he falls short by only one move, since all of white's moves come with tempos. So king f5. So the threat is very simple. He just wants to come to king d5 and win the d4 pawn. Yeah. But maybe black missed this idea by white of first attacking the bishop on f3, and once the bishop moves, you defend the pawn on d4. And again, there is a big difference between this and the last position we looked at, because in this position, white has an extra two pawns. In the last position, white was up only by one pawn, but now he has two extra pawns, and the b5 pawn is again very weak. So white's idea is very simple now. He just needs to win the b5 pawn. He just needs to reach a position where he can win the b5 pawn. So king c4, of course, the most active move on the board. He wants to come to b3, and this diagonal is still under black's control, so the king can't enter like this and can't even push the pawn to d5. But it still doesn't matter, because white has this move knight c5, preventing the king from entering the b3 square. Bishop c6. Okay, there's not much else for black to do. So now the king also can't enter e5 that easily, because the d4 pawn is weak. So first he has to maneuver around with the knight. Okay. Yeah. So finally, he manages to check the king from e5. Yeah, so the king. goes to c3. White's idea is very simple. He just wants to reach the d6 square, from where it would check the king and also attack the pawn on b5. And there's no way for black to defend both these things. So this is the basic idea. Yeah, and white finally managed to achieve this. The pawn on b5 is attacked, and there's a check on the king. So the king has to move, and white just captures the pawn on b5, king a4, knight d6. Black just resigned because obviously this is just met by this. You're just pushing your pawn, and this is obviously a very easy win. King, knight, and pawn versus king. So this was the game, and the difference between this and the last game was in this white had to do something extra to enter with the king. It was not as obvious as the last example we looked at because there was no easy route for the king to enter the game. So instead, white had to first sacrifice a pawn, and only then he would be able to enter the king. He would enter the position with the king. So it's this teaches us that it's not enough to win only with having a strong knight or a strong king. Both these things need to be there, and you need to create more than one weaknesses. So here, white managed to create weaknesses both on the king side and also on the queen side. So, for example, this b5 pawn turned out to be a big weakness, and the f6 pawn turned out to be a weakness. So, because he had these two weaknesses to attack, black managed to win this game. Yes, that is the difference between this and the first example we looked at. So I just want to know if the audio and everything is okay still. There's not much lag or anything, right? Okay, great. Yeah. So we'll look at one more example. Okay, so this is basically a question. So how does white win here? So yeah, white to play and win. I need the plan, not the moves. Just tell me the plan, not one or two moves. Okay, from the queen side, but how? Like what does he have to do? Okay, just tell me how, like exactly, like where the king has to go and where the knight has to be for this to happen. Okay, where does he maneuver his knight? Which square? Okay, knight has to go to a6 and yeah, yeah, exactly. So in this position, first of all, you might first thing that comes to mind is what if you just get the knight to b5 and attack the c7 pawn? But unfortunately, that doesn't really work in this position, right? So yeah, let's try that approach first. And yeah, let's try that. So let's say black just makes moves like this, and you get your knight to a place where you attack the c7 pawn. Yeah. So here you're attacking the c7 pawn, right, with the knight. So even if you reach this position, it's not enough to win the game because black is just going to keep on moving his king back and forth. He's not in any danger of zugzwang. So let's say you try to create a zugzwang. It moves like king d3. It's just not possible. He always has this g6 and f6 square. So no matter what you do, he has these squares. So it's not enough to win the game with only having a knight on a6 because the bishop on yeah, bishop on d8 is going to protect the c7 pawn. So once you realize that, you need to understand that also the king has to enter the game, right? So as we already know, it's not enough for one piece to enter the game to win the game. Both the pieces have to play a role, and in the end game, the king is an active piece, so you have to use it, right? Yeah. So the king has to enter the game position. Exactly. The king has to first enter the position to the queen side. So the best you can do with the king is to go to squares like a7, right? Because black is not going to let you come to b7. He is going to stop you by playing moves like king c8. But for black, unfortunately, the best his king can do is to stay on c8. His king can't go to b8, for example. So king c8 and king a7. You managed to achieve the best with your king, right? Your king is in the best square possible. So now that this you've managed to achieve, you just need to create a zugzwang. Bishop f6, of course. Knight e4. Yeah. So you're attacking the g5 pawn and the bishop. So the bishop has to stay on this diagonal to defend both the g5 pawn and the bishop. And yeah, the bishop. So the bishop goes to f7. So we have some suggestions like king, like what, d7. Yeah, let's just look at it. King a8 exactly. So you're just taking away all these squares and making moves with the king. So again, the bishop can't stay on this f6 square, right? Because the knight controls the f6 square. It can't move away from the square because the g5 pawn is hanging. So you just wasted a move with king a8, right? You give your opponent the move. So only move for black here is king d8. Sorry, bishop d8. So now the question is, how do you win? How does white win here? Yeah, we have the first move, which is knight c3. Yeah, that is correct. The knight needs to go to a proper position to win this game. It's not enough for the knight to just stay on e4, where black can just keep on repeating moves like bishop e7, bishop d8. So the knight on e4 is not ideal. We need to maneuver the knight to a better position. So these moves are quite obvious, right? Knight to b5. So now the knight just threatens to come to a7. So white is threatening knight a7 check, and once the king moves, let's say he plays something like this, for example, knight a7 check. Once the king moves, just king b7 and then knight b5 and knight takes e7. So white is going to win the pawn like this. Yeah, you don't have to go knight g3 to knight f5 because then black can still keep on repeating like this, right? To bishop, he can go to d8 and repeat the position like this. And there from f5 you're not even attacking the pawn on g5, so you can even go to f8 for example. So it won't be a zugzwang, it won't be a full zugzwang. You can keep on repeating moves like this. So it's better to first come to b5, where you're threatening to check the king with king knight a7 and then enter via b7, right? Yeah. So now white is just threatening to win the game like this. So after knight b5, black has to play the move e4 because now knight a7 here you can't enter so easily because this f3 pawn is hanging. So white has to play black decides to sacrifice the pawn with moves like e4, but there's no danger for white here. You can just take the pawn and bishop e5. Knight a7 check. He managed to achieve this. King b7. This is the ideal setup for white, right? The king is on the perfect b7 square. Knight can come here and sacrifice itself. So bishop c3. The idea behind this is very simple. He just wants to prevent. He wants to defend the c7 square with the bishop. So bishop a5. And now it's enough. Knight d4, knight e6 is enough to win the game, right? You just reach e6, and then the c7 square will be undefended. For example, let's say he does this. This is the only move, like knight e6, and this is enough to win the game for white. But white finds a flashier way to win the game. So here he just plays the move knight takes d6 and e5. So obviously, if you capture, then this d6 c7 is winning. So he decides to play bishop c7, the only try. How does white win now? So what is the best way for white to win? Yeah, exactly. Just e6, right? You're just distracting the king from. Yeah, king is overloaded, defending both the c7 square and the e7 square. You just have to make use of that fact. So the simplest way for white to win here is just e6. There's no way for black to defend both the c7 squares and the e7 squares. So let's say bishop a5, e7 check. Black is forced to take it, then just c7. So once you take, so he managed to reach a zugzwang like this. He gains the opposition and reaches a zugzwang position. Black can't come to e6 because of the d5 square. He has to give up the d6 pawn, and this is just game over already. Yeah, exactly. So this was a flashier way for black to win. He didn't have to for white to win. I mean, sorry, but he didn't have to do this. There was a simple way to win. Instead of playing knight d6 here, he could also just go knight d4 and then just come to e6, which is completely unstoppable, right? No matter what black does, even if he goes here or whatever, you just go knight e6 and take on c7, and that's just game over. But white decided to win with some beauty and just sacked the pawn on d6 and went for e5. So both approaches were possible, but the simplest approach was just to go to d4 and then e6, and yeah, that's game over. Okay, uh, 1 second. Now we'll just have a quick look at the final position. Yeah, so this game ended up being drawn, but white had a way to win this game. So the way for white to win was to first first like fix black's pawn on c6 and then try and win this. But the immediate c6 doesn't work because black has this bishop d3. Black is just in time to win the pawn on d5. Yeah. So this is not enough. So this is not enough for black to win, of course. So the immediate c6 doesn't work. So white has to start with the move king to c3. Now he doesn't allow these moves with bishop d3. So if bishop d3 now, he goes d4 because this pawn in game. Yeah, he goes knight d4. This pawn in game is drawn because the king cannot really make any progress. This king is just going to keep on holding this opposition. So this pawn in game is drawn. So white has to go knight d4. But instead of going for the c4 pawn, he is just going for the c7 pawn, which is quite enough actually. So for example here knight b5 and the c7 pawn is going to be lost. Yeah. So now the f5 pawn is also not possible for black to defend. So this is an easy win for white, right? He's just going to take on f5, create a passer here, and then the e4 and g4 squares are weak, including the c4 pawn, which is also quite weak. So this was Bot Phoenix idea with this move. So once white plays king d4, king c3, bishop b7, black is just attacking the d5 pawn because it doesn't really have any other ways to play this position. Since the bishop is completely stuck here, the knight just dominates the bishop. But now c6 finally, and yeah. So white is threatening to come to b5 and take the pawn on c7. So black has to play king e7 here. So now the idea for white is very simple. He just wants to come like king a4, king b5, and sacrifice on b6. So he'll bring his king to b5, which is the ideal square, take away this a6 square from the bishop. Then knight c2, knight a3, knight comes to c4 and sacrifices itself on b6. So this is white's basic idea here. Yeah. So black tries to stop it. King a4, king e7, king b5. Now white's idea is again very simple. He just wants to go knight c2, knight a3, knight c4, and capture on b6, which is enough to win the game, right? Because he'll have these very strong pawns on the queen side, and the king can just go to e7 and advance these pawns b5, b6. So that's enough to win the game. So there's also one more way for white to win the game in this position. Yeah, sorry. Uh, yeah. So what's the problem with here? This looks like it wins the game. What's the problem with this? So what's the problem with this position? Why is this not winning for white? Yeah, exactly. This is a fortress for black. So black has to give the bishop. Obviously, there's no other choice. He's under Zug's Wong. But even if white wins the bishop, it's still not enough to win the game because the knight is stuck on these squares. The knight really can't escape, can't get out of these squares. So he has to just keep on moving the knight back and forth. So knight c8, king d8. There's no way for white to make any progress. The king can't enter the position because the d6 e5 square is covered by the d6 pawn, and all these pawns defend each other. The knight is blocked by his own pawns. So even though white has a whole piece up here, it's not enough to win the game since his knight is just stuck on the edge of the board. Yeah, but there was one more way for white to win the position here. After knight b5 here. Sorry. Uh, yeah, after in this position, white had one more way to win, which was the move b6, and king d8 is just met by this. Knight to a6. Obviously, this is not possible. If you take, the pawn is just going to queen. So this is impossible. So instead, black has to play moves like king d8, but then white has this very nice idea of king c4. And now this is again a Zug's pawn. The bishop can't enter these squares because of the pawns, and the king can't move anywhere because the c7 pawn is hanging. So this is again a very nice Zug long. So white had a few ideas to win, but he chose this king b3, king a4 thing. So once the king enters b3 and b5, the idea is very simple. Let's say white just goes here. You just again black doesn't really have any moves here. Just sacrifice on b6. No matter what you do here, for example, this is just met by b5, b6, b7, and white is going to queen the pawn. So this was the approach white chose to win this game. But there were again a few approaches. Even this move, for example, here was winning. Yeah. So as you can see, when the bishop is completely locked behind his own pawns, and his opponent's pawns do a very good job of restricting the bishop, it's so much easier to play with the knight because the knight can maneuver, jump around it. The knight can easily jump around pieces, and once in close positions, it's just so much easier to play with knights when the bishop is just completely bad and stuck behind his own pawns. Yeah. So I think that's it for today. So we'll stop now. Okay. So good night, guys, and bye.